Just adjusting the audio. Just adjusting. Okay. There we go. Oh, thank you for the phone. Welcome to the stream, says Vicious. Oh, wait, that's right. I forgot to pay attention. This- and this, two. Oh my god, did Fraud just release? Oh my god, Fraud just released. Damn. Screw it, a painting. Does that link to my YouTube stream? Yeah. It's pulling up. Next of paints.
And no, I do not believe there is an outer god of the dragons, and I will cover this in my god section shortly. But let us review the outer gods and attempt to answer some big questions.
That should be.
Namely, what do they
it.
want, and what can they actually do?
There.
Let us start with one that we have covered on the channel before, the Formless Mother, who Moog has become associated with. We learn via the Blood
not
Boon
Scott.
incantation that blood
Cyberbur.
is this Formless Mother's
this-
medium of communion and communication. As it reads, "The Mother of Truth craves wounds. When Moog stood before her, deep underground, his accursed blood erupted with fire, and he was besotted with the defilement that he was born into. Via wounds and blood, the Formless Mother is able to spread her influence. As we learn via Mogwin's spear, Moog's enhanced powers come via his master blessing his accursed blood, telling us that this Formless Mother is actually able to affect blood to the point where it can empower Moog because of his defiled blood within his body. In turn, Moog communes with the Formless Mother by causing her wounds and spreading blood. Again, the more blood, the more her influence spreads. In regions where blood is abundant, such as Mogwin Palace and Rose Church in Liurnia, we can see this corruption taking place in the form of giant cysts, blood roses, and afflicted forms of life. And this is presumably a sample of how the world would be should the Formless Mother and her Lord of Blood claim dominion. And it is also important to note that this order, the Order of Blood, replicates the command structure of the Greater Will. There will be a God of Blood in Mikola, and there is a Lord of Blood in place of an Elden Lord, a stark mirror to Marika and her Elden Lord. So everything about this order and about the powers of the
Covers.
Formless Mother and Outer God
Abe.
is about corruption.
Wait.
Nothing
Okay.
here is being created.
Cover saddle,
Let us look at
cape,
another of the outer
under-armor
gods.
cloth, and
The god of the
straps
Scarlet
inside
Rot,
armor.
which is again a god we have touched upon in this channel. One of the most clear references to this god is via the Scorpion Stinger, but probably a more interesting reference comes from the Blue Dancer Talisman. We've already read that item description, but in essence it talks about an event where this ancient god, a god that was rot itself, was sealed away. And from the item description of the Lake of Rot map, we know that it was sealed below this Lake of Rot. Like the Formless Mother, this outer god exerts its influence over the world and corrupts it via a material. In this case, this material is the Scarlet Rot. Like the Formless Mother, it too has selected a vessel god, the powerful Malenia, who serves as an infection vector for the Scarlet Rot, as we can see by her effect on Caelid, which has spread the Scarlet Rot significantly. I speak on the Scarlet Rot in great detail in my Malenia lore video, but what is clear is that the Scarlet Rot is no mere pestilence, but an aspect or power of this outer god that will remake the world in its image. It doesn't just waste away the body as a pestilence. As Gowry tells us, even the demigods could not rid the world of this pestilence. It is something more than mere disease. However, the Scarlet Rot isn't just death, it is also life, and we can get an idea of what this Order of Rot would look like via the Poison Mist incantation, which reads as follows: "The death that begets life that comes to all equally." That is to say, it is the cycle of rebirth put into practice. Sweeping death brought via pestilence, and new life rising from the carrion of the dead, such as the silverfish-like pests. This is of course realistic, as in the real world when things die, new life comes from that death. You get maggots and flies in the corpses of the dead, as well as bacteria growing within carrion. The Scarlet Rot is a transformative medium that would transform and kill life on this earth, but also bring about new forms of life. We get a preview of what such a world would be like in the afflicted lands of Caelid and the hollowed out Halig tree. Life, certainly, but also death in abundance. A cycle of death and life.
The other night.
There's also the most enigmatic of the definitive outer gods, and that is the outer god of the death birds and their twin bird mother. This is again a subject I've spoke on in great detail in my Death Birds video, but again this outer god is focused upon spreading its influence upon the land, notably in its dominion over funerary practices in the age before the Erd Tree, and the spreading of its death rites. However, the most important probably to consider for this argument is the Frenzied Flame. And like the prior two examples, the outer god of chaos does not act directly upon the world, but acts through emissaries such as the Three Fingers, maidens like Hayeta, and the demon Shabriri, as well as having a corrupting force like the others, the Frenzied Flame, and the spread of the Frenzy Affliction. The aim of this outer god is to once again affect which has already been created by the Greater Will, unmaking it, so that the life is melted down into one form. I will be doing a Frenzied Flame lore video in the near future, so I won't go into it too much depth, but suffice it to say that this outer god spreads its influence via the Frenzied Flame much as the Formless Mother does by blood, and like the God of Rot does via the Scarlet Rot. So while this outer god does operate in the same general manner as the others, it is unique in that it stands more starkly as a mirror reflection to the Greater Will, and indeed it is such an inverse of the Greater Will that some believe that it was once a part of the Greater Will, that the two fingers and the three fingers were once one, making a whole hand, or that at the very least it proves that the Greater Will
Honestly,
is
I
an
think
outer
it would
god,
taste like
because the Frenzied Flame
carrion.
is so similar in its nature to the Greater Will.
I don't know what that tastes like.
And of course, while
but
these are valid,
I mean, I'd hope
I
I
do
don't
not
know what it
necessarily
tastes
agree
like,
with
but-
either, and instead I see the outer god of chaos and its stark mirroring of the Greater Will as posturing, as a mockery of the Greater Will and its ideals, mainly because
So
it seeks
picture
to
the
undo
smell
the Greater
of
Will's idea of
rotted
life.
fish.
And indeed, I don't see it as much different from the positions
I imagine
taken
it tastes
by the outer god
how
of
rotted
blood, for
fish
example.
smells.
All of these outer gods follow the same pattern. They are attempting to corrupt the lands between, but they will also offer up a new pantheon, directly copying and perverting the established pantheon of the Greater Will. The Formless Mother offers the most complete example of what I mean. There is a Lord of Blood in opposition to the Elden Lord, and there could be a God of Blood in opposition to Marika. We see partial constructions of this in the other outer gods as well, such as Melania being groomed to become the Goddess of Rot, and the player character who can become the Lord of Frenzied Flame in opposition to the Elden Lord. Everything that the outer gods take, they take from the Greater Will, and there may be some cosmic balance to it that we don't fully comprehend, that there needs to be a Lord or there needs to be a God. My point being is that the Frenzied Flame manifesting the three fingers doesn't automatically mean that we need to think of the two fingers and the three fingers being one hand. There are many two fingers after all, so it's not like there is just one two fingers. There are two fingers in each of the Divine Towers, and there is of course a two fingers for Ranni. So there isn't a total of 5 fingers anyway, so this has never really made much sense to me. And I see this 2 fingers plus 3 equals 5 as too literal an interpretation. Instead, I see it as symbolic.
It looks like it.
That the Frenzied Flame outer god has chosen 3 fingers to represent
the red
its
juice
vision
inside of the
of
crimson,
uniting everyone once again
the
as
crimson
whole.
interiors
That
flask.
the 3 and the 2 do
That
make
looks like
a
it'd be
whole
raspberry.
5, a whole hand. But it is
That
symbolic.
probably tastes good.
Symbolic of its ideals, rather than it literally being 3 fingers that were torn from the 2. That just doesn't make sense to me. I believe that the Frenzied Flame is essentially just a mockery of the Greater Will's position because it mirrors its own ideals so starkly. Everything the Outer Gods do is based around the Greater Will, in subverting something the Greater Will has already created and established. They do not create anything. And this brings me to the very meat of why I do not believe the Greater Will is an Outer God, for it has done something they cannot. It has created life. The Outer Gods corrupt, subvert, or destroy that which has already been made by the Greater Will, almost as if they enviously eye the lands between and this mortal plane, a parallel to Melkor and Iluvatar from Lord of the Rings. The God of Rot will afflict the world with pestilence, so that new life may emerge from the death. But all of this is based upon the Greater Will's already living creation, the Greater Will's lands and peoples. So too could be said of Mohg and his Formless Mother. We see a preview of their world in Mohgwyn's palace, an infested world of blood and blood-crazed beasts, yet a corruption it remains. This is not true creation. The Greater Will formed life, like clay can be moulded, on a scale far beyond any of the Outer Gods' powers. Yes, they have servants, envoys and vassals, and they can corrupt. But what is that compared to the scale of the Greater Will's creation? This ultimately begs the question at the core of this video. What is the Greater Will? The name itself, Greater Will, is a term to me that has always suggested that it is the greatest of these cosmic beings. And throughout the following sections, I will attempt to prove this by showing its relationship to life, creation, and order. Remember, the Outer Gods are external gods because they are external to this world. The Greater Will created life on this earth. It can't possibly be an external god because it is so intrinsically linked to the life on this earth. And that is what I will show through the next following chapters, that the main reason it is not an outer god or an external god is because it is not external to this world. It is intrinsically linked to it, in fact. Indeed, the way in which the Greater Will is referred to by NPCs is as if this being is truly the ultimate authority in this plane of existence.
The tragic corruption of the Order has taken its toll. Across the realm, life lies in ruin, fallen to pieces. Foul curses and misery spread, unabating. But the Greater Will has not abandoned the realm, nor the life that inhabits it.
The mad taint of their newfound strength. triggered the shattering. A war from which no lord arose. A war leading to abandonment by the greater will.
Both of these references to the greater will and its abandonment of the world already creates an image of a god whose very domain is the safekeeping of this world and the lands found within it, much like the biblical god. And much like the biblical god, his creations can disappoint him and be renounced, much like the demigods, and indeed Marika for her actions. The Christian imagery associated with the greater will and its punishments are undeniable, with the punishment of Marika being crucified, the punishment of the magma worms being akin to the serpent being cursed to crawl along their bellies, and the punishment of the guilty with briars, just to name a few. And as we will discuss later, there are parallels of the Ten Commandments to be made with the teachings of the two fingers. In consort with the biblical language in the Japanese associated with the greater will, this imagery and relationship between the greater will and its world very much paints the picture of a supreme Abrahamic deity. One of the other massive similarities the greater will has to the biblical God is of course creation, and I want to start this discussion with what I see not only as the most important dialogue for this discussion, but one of the most important dialogues in the entire game. I'm of course referring to Hayeta's dialogue after she has touched the frenzied flame and begins to divine its will.
Thank you.
I discovered that.
I have touched them. The words of the three fingers. As your maiden, allow me to divine them. All that there is came from the one great.
But a question, why is Dung Eater the best character? I know, right? Oh my god, best character. You can't go wrong with Dung Eater. Literally.
Torment, despair, affliction, every sin,
Okay.
every curse,
Literally.
everyone.
Actually, I think that's in part
and
2.
so
But I need to
what
wait like
was
7
borrowed
hours. 7 hours.
must be returned, melted all
For part
away
2.
with the yellow chaos flame, until all is one again.
I do not understand why it took me so long to realise how significant this dialogue truly is. Of course I understood its importance in regards to the one great and the motivations of the frenzied flame. However, when researching for my dragon lore video, it finally clicked. The greater will has the power of creation, and in fact is most likely responsible for all life that we find in this world. While this is evident to most, as it was for me, the importance of it is something that is often overlooked, and so let us analyse this dialogue. Firstly, Hayeta states that it was the greater will who was responsible for the division of the one great. So what is the one great? Well, there are those who argue that the greater will once formed part of the one great, due to the similarities between the word great in one great and greater will. Yet again, I turn to Dugman Guide to disprove this, where he states that the differences in language used, specifically the biblical language associated with greater will, makes it far distinct from one great. And to me, it's a concept that we're not really meant to understand. It's back to this idea of cosmic creation. But ultimately, I just see it as a form of life that was just whole and not divided, and is something that we can't really understand. And that ultimately, all life that we now see in the lands between was once all melded together in a singular form, like different pots, cups, and plates being made from the same batch of clay. The life found within this one great has been taken and divided and distinguished from something that was whole and indistinguishable.
Burn the Erd Tree to the ground and incinerate all that divides and distinguishes. Ah, may chaos take the world. May chaos take the world!
Yet divided it was, and life took on new, disparate forms, leading to the species that we see today. In my Dragon's Lore video, I did consider the question of how the Greater Will actually achieved this, how it fractured this one great. As pointed out in a Sinclair Lore podcast, which I will link below, Sophie and Sin make the great point that when the Greater Will acts, it never acts directly, hence it has a vassal beast, a vassal god, 2 fingers, Elden Lord and Elden Ring to enforce its rule on the lands between. And this then brings me back to one of the most important item descriptions in the game, the Elden Stars, which reads as follows. It is said that long ago the Greater Will sent a golden star bearing a beast into the lands between, which would later become the Elden Ring. I therefore theorise that the Greater Will always acts through its intermediaries, and that the advent of the One Great being fractured must be no different. So the arrival of the Elden Beast and the Elden Ring, to me, is a significant event that marks the beginning of the Greater Will's influence on this world, and I believe it was the presence and arrival of the Elden Ring and Elden Beast that influenced the One Great and began the fracturing process. That these two events, the fracturing and the arrival of the Elden Ring, are two intersecting events. To me, the Greater Will is very biblical in that it has two main facets to its domain, the creation of life being number one, and the enforcement of order upon that life that it's created. The idea of order being a primary concern of the Greater Will is told to us early on in its mythos, with the arrival of the Elden Beast, its vassal beast, upon the mortal plane, for its remembrance reads as follows. It was the vassal beast of the Greater Will, and a living incarnation of the concept of order. The concept of order was literally introduced to the world by the Greater Will, and those who brandish the Elden Ring are representatives of that order, the enforcers of the Greater Will's order. We know that the Elden Ring is a tool that enforces the laws and order of the world, for we know via the mending rune of the Death Prince that each incarnation of the Elden Ring, built up by its different runes, is an order. And this makes sense, given the runes of the Elden Ring govern the laws of this world in a certain manner that together, holistically, encompasses an order. Radataskor has done a great video on this very subject, called The Greater Will Doesn't Care About the Golden Order, and I will link that video below. In that video, Radataskor highlights the depictions of the Elden Ring found within Farum Azula, and speculates on something I also have in various videos, that this was the Elden Ring brandished by Placidusax in the time of the dragon's rule, an Elden Ring that represented an order for a far more primeval era. In this video, Radataskor aptly says that the Greater Will just wants an order, and doesn't necessarily care what form order takes. I agree, but we take it further in that I don't think it's necessarily that the Greater Will doesn't care, more that the Greater Will recognises that for different eras, different forms of order and different laws are required, whether that be the more wild era of the Crucible and the Dragon's Elden Ring, or the more refined and ordered period of the Golden Order, and whatever version of order we seek to impose as Radagon's successor. All that is required that there be an order that meets the need of that particular era. And while these actually govern the laws of the world, one can't help but see the parallels between the biblical God again, with the set of commandments and the moral code and laws that would derive from it. This brings us back around to the idea of life. We've already looked at how the Greater Will fills the biblical role of a god through its creation and its application of law and punishment, as well as the symbolism and imagery associated with the Greater Will. However, I want to look at the Greater Will's relationship with life, which I believe is pivotal in understanding its true nature, and how it stands apart from the other outer gods. Thanks to the Godskin Noble set, we know that the Crucible was the primordial form of the Erd Tree, and this is important because they are both tied to the Greater Will, and the Greater Will's management of life. First of all, we know that the Crucible was a churn, where all life was blended together. For the aspects of the Crucible incantations, I'll read the following. This is a manifestation of the Erdtree's primal vital energies, an aspect of the primordial Crucible where all life was once blended together. We also learn from the Gilded Great Shield that once found within the Crucible was primordial matter, which reminds me of the primordial soup and the matter found within of our own planet's history. This hot broth contained the building blocks to all life on our Earth.
Hard to get
Likewise, the Crucible seems to be the
underneath
source
the
of
paint
all
without
life on this Earth, as
messing up.
indeed the aspects of the Crucible incantations does say not just life, but all life. And indeed, Soluria's spear item description backs up this idea, given that the Crucible is close in nature to life itself. It is the source of life. Now, while we learn that all life was blended together in the Crucible, I do not believe that the unity of life is the purpose of this era, and indeed, I more actually see the Erdtree era as the idea of convergence and regression, but that's something I talk about in more detail in my Erdtree lore video. Instead, I believe the Crucible is the way in which the One Great was divided up, and disparate life was born from it, and the reason that all life was blended together within the Crucible is that it was the next stage in evolution from the One Great, which itself was life all blended together. And to me, it was through the Crucible that life was fractured and made disparate. The fact that all life is tied to this source, and thus the Greater Will, is backed up by its successor and next evolutionary form, the Erdtree. Straight off the bat, we can establish that all natural life is seen as connected to the Erdtree, something we learn via the greatest lore item in the game, the Albinauric Blood Clot. This top tier item reads as follows.
Tried so
the
hard,
thick,
but then again, I did
blood
so
of
much
Albinauric.
research on how to actually paint
Albinaurics
these.
are life forms made by human hands. Thus, many believe
So,
them to live
I'm really
impure
proud of
lives,
this.
untouched by the Erdtree's grace. Thus,
Yeah,
if
very fair.
Albinaurics are seen
And
as
my paint
untouched
job.
by the Erdtree's grace because they are artificial, then the implication must be that all natural life is seen as connected to the Erdtree. And indeed, if the Erdtree is the next form of the Crucible, and the Crucible is the source of all life, this makes sense that these two mediums of the Greater Will's power are intrinsically linked to life itself. One
Right,
begat
now I
life,
can touch up any
and one
mistakes.
controls life. And again, if you want an in-depth look at the Erdtree and what its actual function is, I would highly recommend my Erdtree lore video, in which I go into detail on its control over the cycle of life. But in short, the Erdtree establishes a new era of life, a new system through which the Greater Will and its vassals can control life. The laws of regression and causality of the Golden Order speak of life being connected, and how life will regress and ultimately converge. Regression towards the mean means that outliers cannot be tolerated, and life must exist within a more refined set of parameters, ultimately moving towards convergence of all life. This convergence is achieved by life literally
Sure, your
being
painting's
recycled
not
through the
that
Erdtree via Erdtree
That's-
burial. Even in death,
Not the
the
name of the
materials are
game's usually
reabsorbed
said-
and
Oh.
recycled through the Erdtree. I have always seen the process of Erdtree burial as a
I
way
have
of recycling
never
this life,
thinned
that the dead are
the
given back
paints.
to the Erdtree and absorbed, and that this era of the Erdtree, unlike the era of the Crucible, is about the status quo, about refining and controlling the growth of life. But if the dead are absorbed by the Erdtree, and this is a cycle of life, I have always wondered, are new life forms born from the Erdtree? Well, we may have found a plausible answer thanks to the keen mind of the Tarnished Archaeologist. In Tarnished Archaeologist's video, Elden Ring Cycle of Life, which I highly recommend as it goes into far
But
more depth
why?
on these
If I may
ideas
ask,
of the
why
cycle of life,
is
he
it
makes an
seen
astute
as a big no-no?
observation on the doors found within catacombs, where the Erdtree burials themselves take place. On the design of these doors, we see bodies being absorbed by the roots of the Erdtree, and, as Tarnished Archaeologist says, this is a literal representation of what we see in Erdtree burial. With that in mind, Tarnished Archaeologist ponders if what we see at the base of the tree is literal, then can the same be applied to what we see at the top of this depiction, as we see people being born as if fruit or dew from a tree. Tarnished Archaeologist supports the idea that life is born from the Erd Tree by citing the dialogues of Melina if you go to choose the Frenzied Flame path. In this dialogue, where Melina pleads with you not to choose the path of the Frenzied Flame, Melina equates the destruction of the Erd Tree via the burning of it in the Frenzied Flame as literally the denial of new life, as if birth and life is tied to the Erd Tree itself. Finally, Tarnished Archaeology also backs up the Erd Tree's association of recycling life with Renala's amber egg, likening it to an amber from the Erd Tree, which enclosed a great rune of rebirth, and the process of its rebirth is a microcosm of the Erd Tree's command over the cycle of life. And at this juncture in the video, I do just want to ask you to check out Tarnished Archaeologist's channel. They really are a detail-focused channel, and videos like their Erd Tree is an illusion video really have me rethinking what I believe about the game's fundamentals. Again, the entire point of this segue about the Erd Tree and the Crucible is that the Greater Will is not just the creator of life, but also the god who oversees it, controls, and manages it, but is intrinsically linked to it via the Erd Tree, the Crucible, and the Elden Ring. Life is so intrinsically linked to the Greater Will that it can't possibly be termed as an outer god. An outer god literally is an external god, as we have discussed before. How can the Greater Will be one of their number when it is so intrinsically tied to the very nature of life found within its world? It very much is the opposite of an external god. And I think the Greater Will's deep connection, the intrinsic link to life found on this planet, is no better illustrated than by its connection to the dragons. And so it's to these ancient beasts that we turn to next. In my prior lore video on the ancient dragons, I related the chief of their kind, Placidusax, to Tiamat, the Mesopotamian god of the sea, and a being symbolic
I could show you a really
of the
cheap, simple way to
of
make a
primordial
wet
creation.
Oh, I have.
And as I said in
I have
that
one back
video,
there. I have a wet
I feel as though this is an
But
apt
because this needs
connection,
incredibly important,
because the
is to
dragons
add
are
pot.
meant to be
So
symbolic
think
of the
about
early
where's the
primordial
diminished
era
texture
of
on the
life on a planet,
because Phil's not
as we know they
indeed.
belong to the period known as prehistory.
What do you think your
And this is something we can learn from
Ants the
any
paint
of the
ones, right?
dragon protection talismans, which
Think
read as
of-
follows.
Oh,
The
when you
ancient
thin your paint,
dragons who
it's the
ruled
paint one
in the
drop. You think
prehistoric
about your
era
body
before the
indeed.
Erd Tree would protect
guess I
their
don't worry
lord
about
as
it.
a wall of
Ah.
living rock.
Also, isn't
And
great.
so it is
Oh,
that the shape of the dragon has become symbolic of all manner of protections.
paint water.
In a way,
Paint water.
they evoke the era of the dinosaur to
Scary
us,
paint water.
the same idea of primeval life in a chaotic era of life that is so beyond human comprehension. It is easy
Okay, I
to
think
see these
that's-
mighty reptilian beasts taking the place of dinosaurs in this fictional world. However, something else I pondered in that video but didn't really explore was the deep connection the dragons have to the Greater Will and the perfection of their form. So let's go over that again with the most obvious connections of all, the fact that the dragons had an Elden Lord, a position of lordship that is clearly linked to the Elden Ring and therefore the Greater Will. There are people who would counter this claim by claiming that the term Elden does not appear in the Japanese. As I explained in a pinned comment on my Dragons lore video, this simply is not true, and I will now cite the opinion of various Japanese speakers. Firstly, I once again cite Dugmangai, an excellent source of Elden Ring item translations, and in his video 6 Essential Elden Ring Item Descriptions in Japanese, he confirms that the term Eld, found in the Japanese, appears both in the item description of Elden Stars and the Dragon Lord's Remembrance in exactly the same way. I've also had this confirmed by a friend of the channel and reputable authority on the game's translation, Last Protagonist, who again confirmed to me that the Dragon Lord Remembrance in the Japanese clearly paints Placidusax as Elden Lord. There are also other translations which repeat the same sentiment, such as the Reddit comment by user Lamy1, which I will link below, and a comment on my Dragons video from viewer Tio. And so, if you do disagree with this point, I highly recommend that you check out all of these sources, especially Dugmangai's video. So with the semantics firmly tied to the term Elden Lord, what other ties can be seen between the dragons and the Greater Will? As I said at the onset of this chapter, I feel the very makeup of the dragons shows that at their core they are closely tied to the Greater Will and its gold. Firstly, we can see the gold prominently displayed on their physiology, on the golden membrane of their wings, and this facet of their physiology is explored in detail by Zuli the Witch in their A Horrible Nightmare video, which I will link below. In this video, Zuli correctly identifies that this gold only appears on the soft tissue of their dragons,
Oh, you
whereas the
drank
rest of
it.
their body
Okay.
is covered in the gravel stone
I'm actually
scales.
curious.
The gold appears on portions like the wing membrane or the wounds of Placidusax, i.e. on the skin underneath his stony scales. I find this to be a really exciting detail because it means the literal flesh of these beings is gold, tying them to the Greater Will more closely than other beings, given their skin and flesh is literally gold. This is tied to the fact that the red lightning wielded by the dragons itself is imbued with gold, as is directly stated by the gravel stone talisman. Finally, the Elden Lord of the Dragons, Placidusax, has a closer tie to the Greater Will via his powerful breath.
And I regret
Unlike
it.
the orange, fiery breath of his brethren, Placidusax has a golden fire, as is stated in Placidusax's ruin. As I did mention in my dragon lore video, golden fire is significant not only because it is the gold of the Greater Will, but because there is only one other being that breathes this type of golden fire, the Elden Beast. The Elden Beast is very much directly tied to the Greater Will. It is the vassal beast of the Greater Will and brought the Elden Ring to the lands between. That Placidusax is granted very similar powers to a vassal of the Greater Will itself implies a deep connection between the dragons and the Greater Will, especially between their Elden Lord. Earlier on in the video, I argued that the Greater Will fills the role of the Abrahamic or Christian God as a grand creator deity. And as I said in my dragons video, I feel the dragons are almost too perfect. They are perfect vessels for its vision. They are immortal and they wield gold and are immensely powerful and intelligent beings. Farum Azula was their domain, and in that domain there is an inscription or depiction of the Elden Ring in a more primal form. Myself and many others believe that the dragons were the first custodians of the Elden Ring, and that Placidusax and his god that is now fled were the vassal pantheon, much like Godfrey and Marta would be later on. The dragons are so perfect, the perfect instruments to wield the Elden Ring, so in tune with the gold and so powerful. And given the fact that the gold is very much part of their physiology, they feel like they are handcrafted. It was
bad, but it just tasted like
in Genesis of the Bible, God also makes a handcrafted being designed specifically to rule over on his behalf, humans. And so now I'm going to read from the Genesis part of the Bible just so you get an understanding of what I'm referring to. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." God made humanity in his image, and they were his instrument on the earth that he had created, to rule over all life. Is it possible that the grand creator of Elden Ring's world is parallel with this, and made his own perfect creations, designed to rule over all other life forms? Like the Christian God of the dragons made in the Greater Will's image, one can't help but return to the Elden Beast, which itself is fairly draconic in appearance, a cosmic being, and breathes fire like the dragons do. This is a being as close to the Greater Will as we will ever see, and is it possible that the dragons too were made in its image, the perfect beings to rule over the Greater Will's new domain? Another parallel that sets it as the Abrahamic God of this world, of Elden Ring's world. Even if you don't believe that this is a parallel, the hand of the Greater Will upon the dragons is undeniable. Its influence in developing this perfect life form, a being that lives beyond time and literally has gold in its very DNA. This again seems something far beyond what the outer gods are capable of. They corrupt and transform life that already exists, but here we have a god manipulating a life form at its very core, at its very DNA, infusing it with its gold. And much like the biblical god, it seems as though the greater will has had a hand in helping societies develop and guiding his creations. There's of course the beastmen, who we learn have been granted intelligence, that before they were just beasts. For the Cinque Dea item description reads as follows. The design celebrates a beast's 5 fingers, symbolic of the intelligence once granted upon their kind. The beastmen of Far Missoula were once granted intelligence, and as described by the Bestial Vitality incantation, they were once beasts that became something more. They were beings that were given intelligence to them rather than having it evolved. And they would move from beasts to being beings who wielded stone tools, as described by the Bestial Sling, and later iron tools, as described by the Beastman Cleaver. This very much mirrors the development of our ancestors from the Stone Age through to the Iron Age, but instead reminds me of 2001: A Space Odyssey, in which humanity and its ancestors are guided through different stages of development by an outside cosmic intelligence. Whoever we credit the granting of intelligence to, it will always lead back to the greater will's design.
Yeah, but that's why I always make
the
sure.
Elden Beast or the Elden Ring.
Honestly,
again,
I'm probably
it
gonna
makes me
get sick
think
of them
the
the
biblical
moment
God,
that I
who
forget
in the
to
Bible
close
is
one.
described as teaching humanity at various points, such as through the lessons taught to Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel. And earlier I did speak about the 10 Commandments, how in the Bible these came down to humanity via God, and they helped develop the idea of morals and laws. And indeed, in Elden Ring, we get the idea that it too, the greater will, gave us commandments or words of faith via the 2 fingers heirloom, which reads as follows. Fingers cannot speak, yet these were eloquent. Persistently did they wriggle, spelling out mysteries in the air. Thus did we gain the words of our faith. How closely is this tied to the 10 Commandments coming down from an Abrahamic God? These are the words of faith, the words of the greater will coming down to us. Again, it just fills the role for me of that Abrahamic God. And now, with that all said, I think it's time we do a summary of everything we have discussed in this video. When the greater will sent the Elden Beast and the Elden Ring down to the mortal plane, the aim was to create diverse life, and I am of the belief that the Elden Beast and the fracturing of the One Great are coinciding events to stimulate life, and that life as we know it in this world of Elden Ring is therefore intrinsically linked to the Elden Ring. It was begat of it, and therefore all life is connected to the Erd Tree and the greater will. Earlier on in this video, we determined that outer gods are named so because they are external to this group or this world. How can the greater will be considered an external god when it is so closely tied to life on this planet and the creation of this life? It is as much part of this world as we are as the Tarnished. Like the Abrahamic biblical God, the greater will has its chosen vassals, its prophets, its envoys, and its holy scriptures and ideas come from the 2 fingers.
Here we go.
Life and society has been guided by this supreme creator.
Living sound of pain
For all
makes me
intents and
shake and
purposes, the greater
can
will
hear that.
dominates life on this world and imposes its will and order upon all. This to me stands in stark contrast to the outer gods, who are only able to manipulate and corrupt that which has already been created by the greater will. In a way, they are lesser versions of the greater will, stylizing their own lesser orders and ideals on its established pantheon in an almost envious display of posturing. The connections to biblical iconography and language is undeniable.
Honestly,
The
same.
crucifixion of Marika, the handing down of holy words from the 2 fingers,
That's another
and the
reason why I
punishment
like
of the guilty
the
by
pods, the
briars.
noise.
The outer gods are no doubt cosmic beings of immense power that we don't really understand, but they are external to this
Alright,
world,
staying on
and while
the
they are
back
trying
with
to subvert
Tyrant.
them, and they surely can with our help, The power and influence of the greater will towers above them, and for me is something far greater than these outside meddlers, at least when it comes to this mortal plane. Whether or not you agree that the greater will is different from the outer gods, I believe there's plenty of evidence that helps establish its primacy,
Oh
and that
my
it is orders
god.
of magnitude greater than they are, especially
Oh
when it comes
yeah,
to dealing with this mortal
I
plane.
don't want.
And ultimately, for me, it takes the position of a grand supreme deity in this
Oh
particular
my
epic.
god, jeez. Jump scare warning.
The outer gods.
Yeah,
Nebulous,
enough of
influential, and utterly
enough
intriguing.
that.
Very few topics in Elden Ring are of more interest to the community than the outer gods, no doubt as a result of their enigmatic presentation and permeation through different aspects
It's like the
of the lore.
It,
Bloodborne presented
it
the
feels
idea
so
of
much
cosmic
nicer.
gods
Right
to
now.
the Soulsborne community, and as a result,
Feels
it
like
is
I'm
easy to
dragging
view the
blobs
outer
of
gods through a similar lens.
brush.
And this is
Sure.
entirely
I
reasonable,
do
given
kind
the
of like-
massive cosmic elements present throughout the game,
It's just
and
my
the fact that the term outer god is a term used in the expanded Lovecraftian mythos. But is this the correct understanding of these beings? Or are we, as a
some
Western
people, but some
audience,
drop
missing
about
something?
shakers built into them.
Is there something deeper that the outer gods are meant
Sounds-
to convey? For whether you ascribe to the theory that the greater will is a supreme being or not, some of the interactions between the greater will's order and the outer gods makes our understanding of the latter confused. Instances where we see these apparently opposing forces
Shield
playing
first.
a role within the Elden Ring's domain, or instances of contradictory information
Alright, I should
regarding Two Fingers and Empyreans. Do these outer gods in fact present something different? Concepts of fundamental laws made manifest, brought about through the power of the Elden Ring itself, only to find themselves excluded by the current order. In this video, we will do our best to answer the question of the outer gods by looking at it more carefully from a Japanese cultural perspective. I was wrong. That is how I want to start this video, and it isn't the first time that I've admitted such a thing, and I do think it is important for me as a lore theorist and for us as a lore community to continually change and evolve our perspectives on certain subjects. In my last lore video on the Greater Will, I posited the theory that the Greater Will is the God with a capital G, and I stand by my premise that the Greater Will is something distinct from the outer gods. However, something that I acknowledge that didn't quite fit right was my characterization of the outer gods themselves. I posited that the Greater Will was a supreme creator god, and the outer gods were rival cosmic beings, akin to Bloodborne's Old Ones. Viewers were right in pointing out holes in this argument that I did not address properly, such as describing the outer gods as cosmic deities trying to corrupt the creation of the Greater Will. But as pointed out by commenters, the outer god of the Deathbirds, for example, is not a corrupting force. Rather, all we see of the Deathbirds is that they are guides of the dead and overseers of the funerary rites. I acknowledge that these types of questions did hinder my characterization of the outer gods as lesser cosmic deities to the Greater Will, and ultimately it has led me to try and understand the outer gods and what they are really. To that end, I do think that we, of the Western lore community, have a lot to gain by tapping into the ideas being discussed in the Japanese lore community, and that is in part what I aim to do in this video. It is at this point I need to make it clear that some of these ideas are not my original ones. Rather, they came to my attention via the Great Cosmic Axolotl, a viewer who commented these ideas on one of my community posts, and in turn, they cite the famous Italian YouTuber Subako no Meiko as their original source in episode 38 of their Elden Ring co-op playthrough, so I will link that video below, and again full credit to Great Cosmic Axolotl for making me aware of such ideas and nuances. I am going to paraphrase the relevant comment while showing the original on screen. The term used in Japanese for the outer gods is Sotanaru, and this term is used to define beings outside of a group or system, and in this case, the Golden Order, and thus it is what makes them external or outer gods. The idea that they are cosmic beings is largely a Western understanding, and again, the Greater Will is never referred to as an outer god, and linguistically in the Japanese, it is more likened to the biblical god. And indeed, this was the main thesis of my Greater Will lore video, and I will link that below in case you haven't watched it. Carrying on with the comment, Great Cosmic Axolotl suggests that the outer gods are more closely aligned with the kami of Shintoism, divine manifestations of nature, which came into existence via the Elden Ring, as they are all connected to earthly concepts such as blood, disease, and death. To have this idea elaborated on and explained to me in more detail, I actually reached out to Subaku's translator called Mirko, a source of these exact ideas and a respected member of the lore community, and work with Subaku to provide translations for their videos, and so I am very grateful for their support in helping me with this video. They were able to confirm that this is indeed the prevailing opinion in the Japanese lore community, and I will quote them now and show the quotes on screen. As the commenter said, it is more than an idea of mine. It is one of the most popular interpretations in the Japanese community, and I, having played the game in Japanese, have found this interpretation more logical and concrete for some evidences in-game. The general idea we have in the Western community is that the outer gods are a group of cosmic deities that fight against each other for control over the lands between. But the more you delve into the lore, more you see that this theory is pretty weak. The key detail to understand is that even with a Western aesthetic, Elden Ring and other Souls games are Japanese games. Therefore, they mainly and heavily refer to Japanese cultural concepts, and kami is a concept not so akin to one we have in the Western world. Kami are more akin to natural forces, part of nature itself. They are water, plants, trees, sun, moon, snow, etc. The outer gods, in my opinion, and in the opinion of the greater part of the Japanese
no,
community,
actually, these are
just as
part
that,
of
powers
a
energies
custom
that flow through
chess
the world,
set that I'm
and
painting.
that creatures can channel these energies with
I can
prayers
send
and
a
rituals.
link
So thanks again, Mirko, for
to
providing that information.
the original YouTubers.
This idea immediately clicked with me, as it answers a lot of the issues that I have with my own conceptualizations of the outer gods. It makes them fit more neatly into some of the situations we see in Elden Ring. But what are the kami? Wikipedia defines them as the following. In Shinto, kami are not separate from nature, but are of nature, possessing positive and negative, and good and evil characteristics. They are manifestations of Musubi, the interconnecting energy of the universe. These are interconnected spirits or entities that are of nature, part of the interconnected energy of the fabric of the world, and they are not gods.
Yeah, no, this isn't part of
Western
the
sense.
Elden Ring board game. I so
Rather,
badly
they
want
take
to play it
form
though.
of concepts, fundamental concepts, important to life. And more importantly, they are not necessarily external to the Greater Will or the Elden Ring's world. They are in fact part of its creation, but are only external due to their exclusion from the current Order's agenda.
Yeah, no,
And indeed
I still have
later
to
we will look at other spirits in the world that may also be kami, but are not described as outer or external, such as the blue fairy of Shifra River. So where did the kami of this world come from?
Here.
If they are part of the Elden Ring's order, as Mirko suggests, when did they come to be? In many videos I have discussed the idea that the arrival of the Elden Beast and the Greater Will is the beginning of all ordered life on this mortal plane. For those who need reminding of this event, I am of course referring to the description found in the Elden Stars incantation, which reads as follows. It is said that long ago the Greater Will sent a golden star bearing a beast into the lands between, which would later become the Elden Ring. I believe that it was this arrival of the Elden Ring that ordered life as we know it, that it was its presence and influence that fractured the one great and stimulated diverse life. Mirko was also helpful enough to give their opinion and the opinion from the Japanese lore community on this subject as well. And again, I quote them now. For this interpretation about the outer gods being natural forces more than cosmic gods, it is implied they were born the instant the Greater Will sent the Golden Star into the lands between, being the Elden Ring. With this interpretation, it is implied the natural forces are born with it, i.e. the outer gods. Therefore, this theory proposes that these outer gods are in fact manifestations of the fundamentals of life and are a result of the Elden Ring's ordering of life.
You do
they
have
are
to
the
pay for them.
fundamentals of
Here,
life
wait.
made manifest.
1 second.
I referred the subject of gods to Last Protagonist, a friend of the channel and respected authority on the Japanese translation.
It's $10 for
Ring.
the first set,
On the
and then
subject of
$20
outer gods,
for the
they
next
said the
one.
following. It's kind of difficult to broach. Linguistically, the word for outer gods can be taken more along the line of being external, but it is also used to mean outer gods in Lovecraft's work. The issue is, in English, when we hear outer, we tend to think of outer space, but those connotations aren't as strong in Japanese. These ideas from Last Protagonist line up with Axolotl's comments and Mirko's information, in which they claim the common idea that in the Japanese lore community, the outer gods are only outer or external because they are external to the current order only, and that the connotations of outer space are less prominent in the Japanese itself. So to break down this theory, the idea posits that instead of the outer gods being rival cosmic beings competing for control of the lands between and the mortal plane, that they are instead a consequence of the Elden Ring, spirits that govern certain facets and elements of the world that was ordered by the Elden Ring, spirits of nature, entities that represent certain fundamental concepts. And they are as much a part of this world as anything else, but they are only external because they fall out with the current ruling order. Their exclusion is essentially political or ideological from those who exist within the lands between. This sort of idea helps me reconcile some of the difficulties I've had with perceiving the outer gods as rival cosmic beings. And the main example of this is related to Malenia's story. We learn the following from Rani on the subject of Empyreans.
I was once an Empyrean, of the demigods. Only I, Mikola, and Malenia could claim that title. Each of us was chosen by our own two fingers, as a candidate to succeed Queen Marika, to become the new god of the coming age, which is when I received Blythe, in the form of a vassal tailored for an Empyrean.
Rani, Mikola, and Malenia are the Empyreans of the current era, and we learn that this was a position once held by Marika as well, via Malekith's remembrance. This implies that all Empyreans are chosen by the Greater Will as potential candidates to godhood, that all gods were once Empyreans, a sort of nominee system, and that these are the three nominees to take over Marika's reign. That is, of course, until the events of the Shattering, where the Greater Will ultimately abandon the demigods, but that is, of course, another story and another tangent. But ultimately what this means is that at one point, Malenia was a successor candidate to take over from Goddess Marika, and this initially seems to mesh well with the information found in Malenia's remembrance, for it reads, Mikola and Malenia are both the children of a single god. As such, they are both Empyreans, but both suffered afflictions from birth. One was cursed with eternal childhood, the other harboured rot within. This is a detail that I have discussed previously in my Malenia lore video, in which I had Last Protagonists verify with their own translation that it is likely the auspicious nature of Malenia and Mikola's birth that led to their election as an Empyrean, i.e. that they are born of the single-bodied god of Marika/Radagon. This again is reinforced by Malenia's Great Rune, which reads, Malenia is daughter to Queen Marika and Radagon, and her Great Rune should have been the most sacred of all. Again, this reinforces the idea that because Malenia is born of Marika Radagon, the immortal Rebus ruling partnership, that she and her twin are special, and thus they were chosen to be an Empyrean alongside their twin Miquella. Yet this is made a little bit more confusing via a dialogue from Gowry, an adherent of the Order of Rot,
Like,
who
it's already
wishes
been an hour.
Melania to ascend to Goddess of Rot. They say the following.
She was born an Empyrean carrying the Scarlet Rot. An Empyrean is no mere demigod. In the age of the Elden Ring and Queen Manica, the precious Empyrean was born, a new god, to forge a new order.
I've always found the terms and language used here by Gowry very interesting. I've always explained it away in my head that Melania was born and elected an Empyrean, but later was infested with the Scarlet Rot. But that isn't really the truth, because in the remembrance of Melania, it says that she was born with this affliction, so she must have been elected as an Empyrean despite the Scarlet Rot within her. And in fact, Gowry even seems to suggest here that she was chosen to be Empyrean because she could be a potential goddess of Rot. And so if that is true, then it really does contradict the kind of prevailing idea that the outer gods are rival gods, because if the god of Rot is a rival god to the greater will that is seeking to usurp the greater will, Melania was born with the Scarlet Rot. Why was she chosen as an Empyrean to succeed Lord Marika? In one of my favourite Ratatoskor Elden Ring lore videos, he covers a concept called the Greater Will doesn't care about the Golden Order, their thesis being that the Greater Will is only concerned with a form of order being imposed, no matter what form that order takes. I will link that video below, but in essence, what Ratatoskor uses to illustrate this point is the engraving of the Elden Ring found within Farum Azula, which clearly has a different, more chaotic and more full rune makeup than the more stripped back one of the Golden Order. And they suggest that the dragons and their Elden Lord, Placidusax, brandished the Elden Ring in a more early time and imposed a different type of order, far removed from what we would see in the later Golden Order. I too ascribe to this idea, for the Golden Order has now faltered and failed, and as the Tarnished, we are elected by the Two Fingers, and thus the Greater Will, to replace it with a new order. And we can rebuild the Elden Ring as we see fit, and establish a number of new orders depending on our beliefs. The Order of Fracture, the Perfect Order, Order of Despair, or the Order of the Duskborn. Whatever order we choose, we will still be Elden Lord, because order is being imposed and it doesn't really matter what form that order takes. What if the Greater Will's intention on electing Melania as Empyrean was that Melania could be the goddess of the New Age, an age of Rot sanctioned by the Greater Will? Until now, most of us, including myself, assumed that the outer god of Rot was a rival cosmic deity, but as I've just explained, this doesn't really make sense given her election as Empyrean. Gowry even describes this new order, which could be brought about by Melania ascending to godhood, replacing Marika.
I have dedicated myself to her, and to the resplendence of the Order of Rot, the cycle of decay and rebirth.
If this theory is correct, that the outer god of Rot is not a rival god, rather an entity that represents an element of life, disease or rot or decomposition, it is only outer because it falls out with the current established order. And indeed, Mirko has an excellent point to make on this idea of it being external to the current order. And again I quote them. These gods, these kami, are considered outer because they are opposite to the Golden Order founded by Marika. If you notice, most of these outer gods are tied to the concept of death. Rot is decomposition, Flame of Frenzy is chaos and absence of order, and the Formless Mother is blood and loss of blood, etc. This is a very accurate and astute observation by Mirko, as the Golden Order is very much founded upon the removal of the Rune of Death and the confinement of destined death, as we learn via the Mending Rune of the Death Prince, which reads as follows. The Golden Order was created by confining destined death. Thus, this new order will be one of death restored. But now the Golden Order has failed. Queen Marika has disappointed the Greater Will, and now the time has come for a new order altogether, and thus Melania and her potential Order of Rot was considered, and she was elected as an Empyrean by the Two Fingers. Because the Outer God of Rot and its Scarlet Rot was not a rival cosmic entity to the Greater Will, merely a fragment or an element of the world that had found itself outside the current order, and with Melania, the potential to reverse that position had come. Again, the idea of Melania being elected as an Empyrean, a successor chosen by the Two Fingers, has always been an uncomfortable point for the lore for me, but instead should we see the Outer God of Rot as an element of the world that was created by the Elden Ring, then these interactions and confusions
art
begin
outside
to
of
make
stream.
sense.
I love listening to someone else's stream.
So while this helps us to understand some
Like
of the
whatever's
difficult
happening
and
could
uncomfortable
be like
areas of the lore
Minecraft,
involved with the Outer
someone else
Gods
doing art,
and their
painting,
interactions with the Greater Will, we can't
hell,
just
someone
ignore
doing
the
music.
fact that the Outer Gods is a term that is used in the Lovecraftian mythos.
It's just
For
like,
even as I pointed out
in a
my
way,
Greater Well
it
lore
is
video,
like
YouTube creator
feeling of, like,
Manguy in a deleted translation video
they're also being
points
something.
out that the Outer Gods can linguistically be tied to the idea of Lovecraftian beings, the Old Great Ones. And even in English, the term Outer God is used in the expanded Lovecraft mythos, specifically in the Call of Cthulhu RPG game. So if I am claiming that the Outer Gods are more akin to kami, manifestations of natural forces, then how do we reconcile it with the clear allusions to cosmic beings? Well, in my Greater Well lore video, I highlighted the dialogue given to us by Hayeta,
I mentioned Iron Drums.
who, via the Three Fingers, gives us an account of how diverse life on this world came to be.
Thank you. I have touched them. The words of the Three Fingers. As your maiden, allow me to divine them. All that there is came from the one great. Then came fractures and births.
I love listening
and
to someone
souls.
yapping about a topic.
But the greater
Like they enjoy
will
it,
made
just
a mistake.
having someone there as like,
Torment,
for just exactly
despair,
like that's
affliction,
you
every
explained it
sin,
way better than I
every curse,
could.
every one born of the mistake. And so, what was borrowed must be returned, melted all away with the yellow chaos flame, until all is one again.
The fracturing of the One Great is of course a very cosmic event in of itself. It is an event that is meant to be beyond human comprehension. So straight away this fracturing event, which would eventually lead to the formation of these kami, is in of itself a cosmic event. And thus, as suggested by Cosmic Axolotl, these gods or spirits are a consequence of the fracturing itself, of the Elden Ring itself, and that in a way does indeed make them cosmic. And yet, despite these kami being more like manifestations of natural concepts instead of the traditional Lovecraftian cosmic gods, this doesn't mean that they cannot be worshipped or take form. For example, in Shinto, the kami known as Sora Tahiko Okami, the leader of the earthly kami, is depicted as a large man with a beard, and each of the kami can be communed with and worshipped in their own ways. Likewise, we can see the outer gods have their own adherents, despite being manifestations of elements. There are mentions of the Servants of Rot, Lords of Rot, and the Faithful of Rot, led by the likes of Gauri. There are mentions of the Servants of Death and the Deathrite Priests. And of course, when it comes to the Formless Mother, we have the Mogwin dynasty and the Bloody Fingers. And in addition, we get an example of the Outer God of Rot being able to manifest some kind of form via the Scorpion Stinger item description, which suggests that it was able to take the form of a scorpion. So I do want you to bear in mind that while I am proposing that these outer gods are manifestations of natural concepts, that doesn't mean that they don't still share commonalities with gods of other pantheons. But that being said, the way in which they manifest is what helps set them apart from cosmic beings. The way in which their elements are ever present in the world of Elden Ring. And again, this is a point made by Mirko, and again, I quote them. The outer gods, in my opinion, and the opinion of the greater part of the Japanese community, are powers, energies that flow through the world, that creatures can channel with prayers and rituals. That would explain why, despite the Scarlet Rot being sealed inside a lake by the blind swordsman, it still manifested in Melania when she was born. It is a power, an element in the Elden Ring universe. And again, this is another astute observation by Mirko. It has always been a bit of a mystery how the outer gods are able to interact so freely with this world, or why they interact so much the way they do.
Very small
Instead, if you just see them as a component part of this world, everything does begin to make sense. And the more their worshippers and adherents spread their element, or help to cultivate that element in the world, the more that that outer god, that kami, has a foothold in this world. And so with that being said, I do now want to analyse some of the main outer gods through this lens of the kami. I think a good place to start would be with the outer god of Rot, as we have already discussed this in a decent amount of detail. So if we assess this outer god in this new light,
511's good too.
what is this kami's domain? Well, as
you're always cool
Gary
because you're
describes
higher
it as a cycle
than
of decay and rebirth.
the fucking
Indeed, we get
atmosphere.
further elaboration on this order via the poison mist incantation,
That's it. That's
which
a look
reads,
up there. It's a
"Those
winter
who
night.
dwell within poison know
I bet
rot
it being
all
above
too
the clouds.
well. The death that begets life, that comes to all equally. That is to say, it is the cycle of rebirth put into practice. This is a cycle of life being born from death, and of course this is best represented by the Scarlet Rot, the medium of the outer god of Rot, a corroding force of death, and a medium through which this outer god can enforce the idea of life coming from death and disease. For fans of the Warhammer universe, this idea probably isn't that hard to grasp, as this is essentially also the idea behind Nurgle, the chaos god of disease and pestilence, who doesn't really see himself as a god of death, but rather one of life, life that comes from death and disease, a god that sees viruses and bacteria as much a life as anything else. Like Nurgle's various diseases, I see the Scarlet Rot as something maybe more than a natural disease. It is a manifestation of the god itself.
I guess.
And this explains why it cannot be cured as a normal disease could be.
The rotting sickness that afflicts Millicent has no cure. When the Erd Tree flourished, even the demigods could not stave off its effects, despite their nigh godhood.
The Scarlet Rot is not like the other poisons we find in the world. It is truly an unstoppable force, because it is the purest expression of this kami's domain, and indeed we see the cycle of life from death anywhere we find the Scarlet Rot. While the Scarlet Rot eviscerates all other forms of life it touches, from this death comes new life, the Kindred of Rot, the silverfish/cockroach looking enemies in the game. This type of life from death is of course reflective of our real world, where plenty of life, bacteria and other insects and carrion eaters flourish due to the carcasses of other life forms. We see the Kindred of Rot rising from death like maggots, and we see the carrion eaters in the forms of the dogs and crows throughout Caelid. Caelid isn't as simple as a field of death. It is in fact a new ecosystem, where new life forms flourish and others die. As it is in our world, rot, decay, death and disease are just natural parts of life, and we should see this order of rot in the same way, that its kami is just a manifestation of these natural concepts. And with that said, I now want to look at another natural force that I believe is a good example of a kami that plays in to the Scarlet Rot's history and story. We had previously discussed the idea of Shifra River in my Scarlet Rot video. We highlighted a Reddit post by the user Nameless Singer, who confirmed that the word Shifra is Gaelic for fairy, and thus posited that the blue fairy from the Blue Dancer talisman was a manifestation of the river itself, and that they provided the tools necessary to the blind swordsman to defeat and seal away the outer god of rot. Looking back on this now, the Shifa River and the Blue Fairy should have been our first hint that the natural forces of this world manifest themselves like godlike beings or spirits, and that this kami of the Shifa River is probably similar to the other outer gods, but instead does not find itself externalized by the current order. We of course learned that these two spirits came into conflict via the Blue Dancer charm, which reads as follows.
Yeah.
The dancer in blue represents a fairy who in legend bestowed a flowing sword upon a blind swordsman. Blade in hand, the swordsman sealed away an ancient god, a god that was rot itself. So the spirit, or kami, of Shifa River was in opposition to the scarlet rot. And this makes sense given the Shinto concept of flowing water and stagnation. I have discussed this concept in a number of videos, but in essence, flowing water in Shinto is representative of life, and stagnant waters, which in real life harbour disease and parasites, are representative of death. And this idea is actually further alluded to in the blue cloth set of the warrior starting class, and the description reads as follows. The blue colour of its fabric symbolises brisk waters, as fluid and flowing as the sword in the hand of its wearer. Just as still waters turn foul, stagnation leads to decay. Warriors must remain ever drifting. This warrior class is described as being part of a nomadic tribe in the class selection screen. So not only do they represent the flowing waters and thus life through their combat style, but also in their actual lifestyle, as nomads are always on the move.
Someone cares about me.
If you want a great exploration of these Shinto themes, then I would highly recommend the Aesir Aesthetics video on the Eastern themes found in Silent Hill, as they are similar to the ones found in Elden Ring. Regardless, given that both the Rot and the Shifa River represent these two important concepts in Shintoism, really does lend credence to the idea that kami are present in this game. And I'm sure this would be immediately apparent to the Japanese audience, but it's something that maybe just goes over our heads as a Western player. Mirko suggested that the outer god of Rot is an outer or external god because it is linked to the concept of death, and death of course has been very much confined by the Golden Order, and thus anything connected to it would find itself external, would find itself being an outer god. But the Golden Order hasn't always existed, so does that presuppose that the outer god of Rot was not always the outer god of Rot? And indeed, it is referred to in a different manner in one of the item descriptions, in the Blue Dancer Talisman, where it is referred to as the Ancient God of Rot. An interesting semantic point to consider. But speaking of death, let us move on to the next of the outer gods on our list, and that is of course the outer god of the Death Birds. Now, this subject certainly highlighted one of the flaws in my original understanding of the outer gods in my Greater Well lore video. In that video, as I have said, I was trying to argue the case that the Greater Well differs from the outer gods, and clearly, as you see from the premise of this video, I still believe that to be the case. However, where that video was the weakest, in my opinion, was in the actual description or depiction of the outer gods, which at that point I understood to be cosmic beings that essentially competed with the Greater Will. To that end, I characterised outer gods as rival cosmic gods that were attempting to spread their influence in the lands between by corrupting or altering the world with the element that is specifically associated with each outer god, i.e. the scarlet rot for the god of Rot, or blood for the formless mother. However, that obviously doesn't really work with the Death Birds.
Perfect brush.
And so I really appreciate everyone's input on that video, as it does help me learn and investigate things in new angles. So if you have any comments about this video, please leave them below. So with that said, let us re-examine this god through the lens of kami, and how we can reconcile its role within Elden Ring's world. Firstly, we know the Death Birds are connected to an outer god via the twin bird kite shield, which reads as follows. Shield featuring a vividly painted twin bird. the twin bird is said to be the envoy of an outer god and mother of the deathbirds. This firmly links the deathbirds and their death rites to this outer god, and thus are relevant for the content of this video. We learned that the death rites were funerary rites that existed before the Erd Tree, and thus before the Erd Tree burial would usurp their position.
Real. Oh my god.
We learn this via the explosive
That, and I
ghost
just
flame sorcery,
hate spiders.
which reads as follows. In the time where there was no Erd Tree, death was burned
Spiders
in
and
ghost flame.
centipede.
Deathbirds were the keeper of that flame. With the idea of Kami now firmly explained, this now makes sense. This outer god is representative of death and guiding spirits to the other side. In my video on the Deathbirds, I likened them to the concept of a psychopomp, spirits whose purpose is to guide the dead to the afterlife. The explosive ghost flame description describes them as the keeper of these ghost flame pyres, and we learn that these pyres burned in graveyards via the death poker. And furthermore, we learned that priests assisted these deathbirds in these rites via the death ritual spear. Deathbirds are symbolic of death in the world of Elden Ring, as much as the skull may be for us in our world. This is something we see in the Ravenmount assassins, who take on the appearance of the Deathbirds, as though to represent death itself. The reason they are symbols of death isn't just because of the Deathbird's prominent role in administering death at one stage. It is because they are spirits born of the Kami of death itself, manifestations of the fundamental elements of death. Again, the theory that the outer gods are Kami just makes more sense because it makes everything fit more neatly. The reason Deathbirds are symbolic of death is because they are of death. And while the Deathbirds and their outer god once highlighted a weakness in my argument, I think they also highlight a flaw, or at least fit uncomfortably, in the theory that the outer gods are merely cosmic beings. Why would the outer god of the Deathbirds come to a rival outer god, i.e. the Greater Wells world, merely just to play a role in that world, to assist in the shepherding of the dead of that world? And some may see it just as a clumsy attempt to shoehorn some cool ideas about death and coolly designed bosses into the game. No, again, I think the idea of outer gods being Kami, spirits and manifestation of fundamental laws of this world, again makes more sense. The outer god of death fits into this world before the Erd Tree, administering death as part of the Elden Ring's creation. And for many within Elden Ring's lore and world, they understand that the Deathbird is the true symbol of death itself. With the Golden Order having confined death and subsumed the processes of death by Erd Tree burial and removing death altogether,
into it, or
it is
it
no
will scare
wonder
you
that
away.
the Deathbirds have found
but
themselves pushed to the fringes of this world. And indeed, one can't help but notice their shattered forms, perhaps connected to their irrelevance and externalization with the confinement of death. Their form reflects their lack of purpose or their confinement from the order of the world. And now with that said, I want to move on to the most visceral of the outer gods, the Formless Mother.
Okay.
I think that the two prior outer gods were more important for the discussion,
Okay.
and that to a degree
So,
the Formless Mother fits more easily into the template
I'm
of Kami.
gonna pass this for a moment. Okay, so Elden Ring, it's I don't even know where to start on that. Oh shit. Yeah, I don't even know where to start on this. But okay, so that's such a I can't even explain it. Okay, basically, yeah, I can't even. Exactly! Son, once you get into it, there's no coming back. It's literally Malcolm in the Middle. Love that. Love that show. How's this look compared to this one? I can't tell if I put too much or too little on. Okay, hold on, wait. It's so hard typing in this position. Okay. This, oh my god.
Malcolm, where have you been? You gotta get in on this.
Dad, I want skating lessons.
Son, you know, once you start, there's no going back.
I know.
This means total commitment. Once you begin the path, there is no leaving the path. Are you sure you're ready for that? I mean, really ready?
I guess so.
Neat. We'll start tomorrow. Come on, dig in before they harden.
That's exactly how it feels. But it is just... This is a part... Okay. I'm just gonna say, I'm 8 hours into this video. And we're just now scratching the, I guess the surface of it. So... It's 8 hours in of a 14-hour video. And that's part 1 of 3. It's roughly 70 hours to explain this, and I believe that's including the DLC. To explain the full story of what we know, not counting speculative, which would add probably a good 20 to 30 hours to it. We would need to watch 70 hours of video. The guy who wrote the Game of Thrones? Yes, okay. So, I'm watching Game of Thrones, and it's so good. I'm on season 3, I think episode 5 now, but... George R. Martin, he wrote the original story, like, the first good thousands of years prior to where you take... prior to where the game takes place when you actually play it. But... Then came Miyazaki. Hidetaka Miyazaki was the one who made Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro. He's the genius who absolutely destroyed the world. Basically, George R. R. Martin made an outline for the game. It's so good, I would so recommend it. But he made, in a way, a D&D outline. Or a D&D campaign outline for Elden Ring. All the story compressed into one or a few documents. Hidetaka Miyazaki was tasked with take these characters, destroy everything, and make everybody's lives miserable. And it turned out beautiful. Real. All of that just to be called Maidenless.
However, that doesn't mean that there aren't some opinions of mine
Like,
that I will be
bitch,
reforming from my Lord of Blood
ambience.
lore video based on this new
Ambience.
Kami theory. In that video, I
I
painted
killed
the
him in
outer
my
god
first
as
playthrough.
most do,
The first guy
a
he beats,
cosmic deity beyond our
he is
comprehension
a
that chooses blood as
bitch.
its medium to communicate and interact with the mortal plane, and ultimately usurp it with a god and lord of blood. However, with the introduction of the ideas of Kami, we can begin to formulate an understanding of this being as well. While there is an obvious connection to blood, I feel Mirko is onto something when they have tied all of the outer gods that we know of to a form of death, and in this case wounding as to cause bleeding, a more different aspect, a more visceral aspect of death. For example, the incantation Blood Boon highlights the Formless Mother's relationship not only to blood, but specifically to wounding, as it reads as follows. The Mother of Truth craves wounds. When Moog stood before her, deep underground, his accursed blood erupted with fire, and he was besotted with the defilement that he was born into. Blood is of course one of the most important fundamentals of life, a potent fluid that is essential for any living thing, and thus the spilling of it is indeed tied to death. But blood is also an important facet of life, and thus the Formless Mother appears to be the Kami of blood and blood shedding. But this is why Omen, like Moog, are such powerful tools for the Formless Mother, as the accursed blood of the Omen is far more potent as blood than regular blood, and thus is a more powerful instrument for this Kami. However, there is another entity that is closely tied to some of these ideas that will need to be addressed here before I move on, and I refer to the Blood Star. Now, I have essentially tied the Mother of Truth to blood and the shedding of blood, and there is one particular region of this world that really feels defined by shedding of blood, and this is the Land of Reeds. This is the region from which the samurai starting class owes their lineage, and we learn a fair bit about this land from the armor description of the samurai, which reads as follows. The Land of Reeds has long been locked in a miserable civil war, during which time it has remained alienated from the cultures of its neighbours. Little wonder that the entire nation has succumbed to the blood-soaked madness, or so it has said. I discussed these ideas in my starting class lore video, but I find the description of this conflict to be truly fascinating. While the idea of a civil war in a region clearly based on medieval Japan is most likely a reference to the real-world Sengoku era, the era in which Sekiro is based, I think there is something else here. The term blood-soaked madness suggests that the warfare may not be entirely mundane or normal, and that another force may be encouraging this constant shedding of blood. Indeed, the Land of Reeds is almost entirely characterized by blood, for the Reedlander appearance default in the character creator tells us that this is a land in which blood is a common sight, and we know from all of their weapons that they are designed specifically to emphasize blood loss on their opponents. This blood-soaked madness is best personified by one of the most infamous among their number, Okina. We learn of this legend via his mask, which reads, "The more he sharpened his mind, the more the absurdities of the world came into stark relief, and so Okina renounced it all and rose to a higher plane. There was only himself, his katana and its mastery. Before long, Okina became a demon of a swordsman." Okina really highlights what I am getting at here, that the shedding of blood, for some, was embraced with a sort of zeal that is almost religious in nature. This item description describes Okina as ascending to a higher plane, as if he is an instrument of a higher force. In a way, this is true, for through Okina's bloodshedding, he is indirectly honouring and empowering the Kami of bloodshed, the Formless Mother. Thus, it makes sense that he would come to the attention of her greatest servant, Moog, the Lord of Blood, and we learn of this meeting via the Rivers of Blood item description, which reads as follows. When Moog, the Lord of Blood, first felt Okina's sword and madness upon his flesh, he had a proposal, to offer Okina the life of a demon whose thirst would never go unsated. It makes sense that the Lord of Blood would raise Okina up and harness his prowess for bloodshed. The more blood that is shed, the more his agenda is progressed in having the Kami of Blood at the centerpiece of the next order. That is all well and good, but there is a connection between the blood-soaked lands of the Land of Reeds
I'll be back.
and the Blood
Okay.
Star. We hear of this mysterious
cooking.
force, the Blood Star, via the Thorn Sorceries, the Briars of Sin and the Briars of Punishment, and they both read the following. The guilty, their eyes gouged out by thorns, lived in eternal darkness. There they discovered the Blood Star. These guilty are of course the Thorn Sorcerers that accompany the Order of the Fire Monks, and according to the item description we just read, they were able to command these Thorn Sorceries after they themselves were blinded with thorns, and in their eternal darkness, in their blindness, were able to commune with this entity known as the Blood Star. In a way, this star is connected in a similar fashion to the way in which primeval sorcerers commune with the stars, though in a more bloody and visceral way. I discussed this in my Primeval Current lore video, but in essence I discussed how the primeval sorcerers are able to view the abyss of space in which stars are born through connection with the primeval current. This Blood Star also seems to exist in a sort of abyss, the abyss of blindness, but specifically connected to the blindness that is caused through violent means, through eyes being pierced by thorns. And this may make us wonder, does this Blood Star have a tie to the Mother of Truth? But why does it connect to the Land of Reeds? Well, the starting samurai class wields the red thorn shield, and these red thorns can only symbolize one thing, the Briars of Sin, and by extension, the Blood Star. Is it a coincidence that both the Mother of Truth and the Blood Star are connected to this bloody region? Are they the same thing, or do they just draw from the same well? I leave it to you to decide, but one thing that I would suggest is that some kami appear in different forms, so it could be that this is the Mother of Truth in a different form. However, there's also the idea that there are different kami for the same fundamental elements, i.e. there are multiple kami of earthly elements. So both the Formless Mother and the Blood Star could be seen as connected to blood, and that they are simply kami that share a similar class. I highlight the similarities, and I leave it to you to decide whether these two are linked or distinct entities. A question that people keep asking me in comments or in my community posts are, do I think the fell god, or the moon, or the stars, or the Blood Star are outer gods? And quite frankly, my answer had been, I am not sure. My previous understanding of the outer gods as cosmic beings made it fairly unclear what would fall within this definition, and what did not. However, with this new understanding of kami as spirits or manifestation of natural forces, I am more free to give my opinion. Yes, I most likely believe that these forces, such as the fell god and or the moon, could be akin to kami, manifestations of certain fundamentals. The announcement trailer for Elden Ring many years ago now stated that the Elden Ring commanded the stars, and so while we may view them, the stars, as cosmic powers, they too are part of the Elden Ring's world, and so should they too not have a spirit that guides and binds them? We learn via the hammer item description that smithing originated amongst the giants, and the vessel for the Flame of Ruin that the fire giants guard is of course known as the Forge. Perhaps the fell god is the kami of metalwork, industry, blacksmith, or simply fire. Not evil, just a force that was painted as evil by Marika's ruling order because it had posed a threat. The fell god versus the Erdtree Order, the Shifa River versus the Scarlet Rot, the Golden Order versus death. We have seen these as struggles between great cosmic beings, but I believe we are wrong. These conflicts are just political, based on the desires and ambitions of those who oppose their order upon the mortal plane. They are just opposing forces, but opposing forces of the same system. All the forces behind them All of these outer gods, fairies, ancient gods, and spirits, are all part of the same system. They are kami, of a world commanded and forged by the Elden Ring. They are the manifestations of the building blocks and elements of this world. But this of course leaves one massive elephant in the room, the frenzied flame. If it too is an outer god of this world, then how does it fit in? Life is difficult. The world can be an unforgiving place, and we all experience grief, heartbreak, and loss. But for most of us, these moments are buoyed by the support of our loved ones and the beauty that can be found in the world. Yet what if these moments of grief could be distilled into a single element? The collective grief and suffering of humanity coalesced into a single form, a powerful force that sought to undo the mistake of life itself. These are the powerful philosophical ideas behind those who have succumbed to the flame of frenzy, to those who would seek to bring about a Lord of Chaos and burn away the diversity of life. However, behind the philosophy and human element to this story, there are other cosmic facets that are a little harder to grasp. The story of a force that exists solely to reduce the work of the greater will and burn it down to ash. A force that is born of the collective suffering of this world and has manifested itself not only as a powerful concept, but an actual power that threatens to swallow the world. So join me this week as we finally tackle the mysteries of the frenzied flame and the three fingers. Before we begin this video, I do wish to acknowledge two very important videos by other creators that have greatly influenced my core ideas on this subject and some of the lore of the frenzied flame. These videos are the Lore Hunter's Sabriri video and Ratatascor's video on the frenzied flame. And while I will directly reference these videos at certain points, I wanted to make it clear that these videos have influenced me at a foundational level. So I think the best place to begin when talking about the frenzied flame is talking about its gestation within the lands between, and how it has come to exist in this world. And by this I don't mean its summoning at the hands of the Great Caravan, nor Shabriri's role in helping spread this force throughout the land, though we will talk about these subjects both shortly. Rather, I mean the conditions that allow this force to exist in the first place, where it comes from, and how it is able to be summoned and spread in the first place. In my Outer Gods lore video, I presented what I believe to be a fairly solid analysis of the Outer Gods, and I would recommend that you watch that, but I will still go over the foundational ideas for the sake of analysing the frenzied flame and the three fingers. In that video we posited that the Outer Gods are akin to the concept of kami, and this idea came to my attention thanks to a commenter Great Cosmic Axolotl, and then I discussed the subject with Sabako no Meiko's translator Mirko, and they let me know that this is one of the prevailing understandings of the Outer Gods in the Japanese lore community. The kami are essentially gods or spirits which are manifestations or personifications of concepts that were created as a consequence of the Elden Ring's creation. And to basically explain this idea in better detail, I will quote Mirko now. Kami are more akin to natural forces, part of the nature itself. They are water, plants, trees, sun, moon, snow, etc. The Outer Gods are, in my opinion, and in the opinion of the greater part of the Japanese community, just that. Powers, energies that flow through the world, and that creatures can channel with prayers and rituals.
By suspicion.
And these
these
kami are considered outer because they are opposite to the Golden Order founded by Marika. If you notice, most of these Outer Gods are tied to the concept of death. Rot is decomposition, frenzied flame is chaos and absence of order, and the formless mother is blood, loss of blood, etc. So kami is a concept in Shintoism, where gods are manifestations of natural concepts and fundamental elements in the world and of life. I was also informed by various commenters that this idea isn't exclusive to Shinto, and is linked to the idea of animism, the idea that all natural phenomena have a spirit. As Mirko states here, the main reason the outer gods are considered outer is because they are external to the current ruling order. But importantly, they are still linked to concepts created by the Elden Ring, and they are not cosmic beings that are rivals to the greater will, as I once believed myself. So returning to the Frenzied Flame, this concept is heavily implied to be an outer god as well, via the descriptions of the varying stages of the unalloyed gold Michelin needle, described as an implement designed to ward away the influence of the outer gods, and its only true use in-game is to ward away the influence of the Frenzied Flame. Thus it is suggested that the Frenzied Flame is an outer god. So to understand where the Frenzied Flame may have come from, we need to explain the origins of this world, and how we believe these outer gods fit into this world. So once again, as we have so many times on this channel, we need to refer to Hayeta's important dialogue regarding the creation of diversity of life and the separation of the One Great. And while we listen to this, it is important to bear in mind that the author of this speech is the Three Fingers, as she reveals this after we touch her with the Frenzied Flame and divines these words from the Three Fingers themselves. So we of course must consider their bias when considering the following words.
The words of the Three Fingers. As your maiden, allow me to divine them. All that there is came from the One Great. Then came fractures, and births, and souls. But the greater will made a mistake. Torment, despair, affliction, every sin, every curse, every one born of the mistake. And so, what was borrowed must be returned, melted all away with the yellow chaos flame, until all is one again.
So in essence, Hayeta here tells us that once life was indistinguishable, but the actions of the greater will led it to becoming fractured. I have posited in the past that the arrival of the Elden Beast and the Elden Ring, as described by the Elden Stars incantation, was the event that stimulated this change, as a result of the Elden Ring's influence. In many ways, the Elden Ring is the body that governs the world itself, and its order, and so to me it makes sense that the Elden Ring's arrival and its power would have led to the One Great forming to reflect the influence of the Elden Ring. I would thus suggest that each facet of the world was also formed out of this One Great by the Elden Ring. Elements and fundamentals such as death, life, disease, fire, water, etc. This too is an opinion shared by some in the Japanese lore community, as we learn the following via Mirko. For this interpretation, it is implied that they were born the instant the Greater Will sent the Golden Star into the lands between. With this interpretation, it is implied the natural forces are also born with it, therefore the gods themselves. It is just one of the many speculations of the Japanese community, but I thought it was right to add this information anyway. So thanks again to Mirko for that information. So it therefore follows that if we are suggesting that the Frenzied Flame is one of these outer gods, one of these manifestations of a worldly element, then we must be suggesting that the Frenzied Flame was also born with the arrival of the Elden Ring, and the creation of the world as we know it, and the separation of the One Great. I think that in a way this makes sense, as the Frenzied Flame definitely is the embodiment of a number of ideas. However, it is unique among the outer gods in that it exists almost as a mirror reflection of the Greater Will's order, and in opposition to it, rather than trying to fit into it. Mirko's understanding of the Frenzied Flame is that it is the concept of chaos or absence of order, and while there are philosophical nuances to this, which we will discuss momentarily, I do think that this is more or less close to the truth of what the Frenzied Flame is meant to embody, what its kami or outer god is embodying. In this world, order is essentially structure, giving life structure, as the Greater Will did when it fractured the One Great, giving life form and ordering it from an indistinguishable, chaotic mass. And so when the One Great was shattered and fractured by the Greater Will, all these concepts and fundamentals of the world exist in balance. Where there is death, there is life. Where there is light, there is dark. And so, of course, when the Greater Will created the idea and the concept of order, it must have created the concept of disorder by default. Every concept has an opposite, and therefore I do agree with Mirko's interpretation that these kami came into being due to the ordering done by the Elden Ring, and with it the creation of fundamental laws and concepts. Balance in all things, even if that means there is a force in opposition to the very force that created it. So with order came a shadow that opposed the most central and fundamental facet to the Elden Ring's domain, order itself. And with that we can assume that this force would have had the potential to manifest a god, a kami much like the other outer gods, hence the outer god of the frenzied flame. And as Mirko said, each of these outer gods, each of these concepts can have their own followers and worshippers who can help channel its power. We have, of course, the Mohgwyn dynasty and the Bloody Fingers who serve the outer god of blood, and we have the devoted of rot like Gowry who serve the outer god of rot. And in this case, with the outer god of the frenzied flame, it is no different. There are those who worship the outer god of the frenzied flame. So the story of those who would become representatives of this particular ideology is something quite intriguing and somewhat confusing, but it is important for us to assess in order to get a stronger understanding of the frenzied flame. For me, the best place to start when analysing the adherents of this particular ideology would be with the fingerprint stone shield, which reads as follows. A great stone shield with an intricately carved fingerprint design, one of the heaviest of all shields. Part of the tomb of an ancient god, the readerless fingers relayed their messages through these imprints, said to be the very seeds from which frenzy first spouted. This is a really fascinating piece of lore because it firstly tells us that this is the source of the flame of frenzy, but that is something we will consider in the next chapter. However, what I want to discuss in this current chapter is the idea of the god of the frenzied flame, and thus it's interesting in this fingerprint stone shield's description that we get mention of an ancient god that was placed within a tomb. Now, where this tomb is should be a straightforward one for the player to discern, as we find the shield itself in the tomb of the Great Caravan, directly above the three fingers themselves. Indeed, the tragic caravan is described to have been entombed in the description of the nomad's ashes. But what is this tomb, and what is the ancient god that was entombed within? We learn via the fingerprint shield that unlike the two fingers who have interpreters, like the finger reader Enea, the three fingers have no such readers, and thus they used fingerprints to convey their messages. But the question remains, whose message? Is it their own, or are they envoys like the two fingers are? Well, the first suggestion that I have for you is that it is the message of the three fingers themselves, a case of Occam's razor, if you will, given that it is the three fingers that we find in the tomb, and the three fingers are mentioned in the same breath as the ancient god in the fingerprint shield's description, and that it is the three fingers that are considered the god, and they do not play the same envoy role that the two fingers do for the greater will. I do also believe that this is backed up by the item Note the Lord of Frenzied Flame, as it reads the following. Beneath Leyndell, at the bottom, lies our Lord, Lord of the Frenzied, the three fingers who hold us in thrall. The specific wording here, to me at least, suggests that the three fingers are revered not just as envoys of the Frenzied Flame, but as a lord or god themselves. I believe that the three fingers are the corporeal manifestation of the kami or outer god of chaos, and that they take the form that they do because of what it stands for. It stands for reunification. I've never been one to believe that there was once a 5-finger hand, and that it was split after the one great was split, because first of all there are multiple 2 fingers, so the maths doesn't add up anyway. So rather than seeing these 3 fingers as something that was literally torn off a 5-fingered hand, I instead see them as a manifestation of the god of chaos itself, its chosen form meant to symbolically oppose the 2 fingers, representing the other 3 of a whole 5, a reflection of its goal to return the world to a single state of matter. The way in which these 3 fingers communicate only serves to further contrast them with their 2-finger counterparts. The 2-finger heirloom highlights the fact that the 2 fingers communicate in a more graceful and organised manner, as it reads the following: "Fingers cannot speak, yet these were eloquent. Persistently did they wriggle, spelling out mysteries in the air. Thus did we gain the words of our faith." The 2 fingers wriggle and are interpreted by finger readers, and from these come the words of the faith, transcribed into cipher, as shown by the cipher pata, a language of light. It is all so sophisticated, organised, and orderly. And then you have the 3 fingers that crudely transcribe its messages by animalistically gouging its fingerprints into stone, such as we see it doing when we first gain an audience with it, and basically just a far more crude and inelegant way of transcribing its message as opposed to its 2-finger counterparts. And I think this contrast is useful in showing how the 3 fingers are meant to symbolise the complete subversion of order and reflect their 2-finger counterparts. The lore hunter also ponders the question of what the 3 fingers are in his excellent video on Shibiri, and he offers a differing perspective on this that I could also buy into, and so I will offer it now. In his video, Lore Hunter highlights how, like Rani, chosen candidates, or Empyreans, have their own 2 fingers. Lore Hunter therefore speculates that these 3 fingers once served a god, who ruled and brandished the Elden Ring in some previous age that we don't know about, but of course that this god died in due course, and is the ancient god that is mentioned in the fingerprint stone shield that was then entombed alongside its old 2 fingers. Without any purpose, now that their god was dead, they were cast aside and left to rot beside their fallen god. These 2 fingers would warp and become envoys for the frenzied flame, warped and driven mad by their loss of purpose. Lore Hunter goes further and suggests that there is no outer god at all, per se, but instead that this is all the actions of the 3 fingers, former servants of the greater will, cast aside, and that they are outer god / cosmic due to the fact that they are related to the greater will itself. And again, I highly recommend you check out that video that I will link below. Whichever of these explanations you choose to believe, I do think it is clear that the 3 fingers are in some way linked to the ancient god that is entombed here, and for whatever reason and in whatever way, they are now representatives of the frenzied flame in this mortal plane. And with that said, let us assess the tomb itself. Evidently we must assume that it is very old, given that the god buried here is referred to as ancient. But is it older than Leyndell itself, or was it built alongside it or after it? The answer is really impossible to know for sure, but I will give my personal take on it, as I believe it's quite interesting to consider the age and purpose of this tomb. I believe that it is pretty clear that some of the architecture surrounding the Frenzied Flame proscription must have been built around the same time as Leyndell. The shunning grounds around it and above it, for example, appear to be some kind of sewer system, which must clearly have been built for the city above it. I would also argue that the church that actually acts as a seal to the entrance to the Frenzied Flame proscription, i.e. the arena in which we fight fake Moog, is at most from the early Erdtree era, because it has the same architecture as other catacombs that we find around the world.
Actually, I'm
and also
pretty
like
sure
the
I just
nearby Leyndell
finished.
catacombs, by the way, which is also adjacent
Yeah,
to this sewer
that's
system.
it.
The reason that I think these are similar architecture is of course because you can find these skeleton statues within this church that you can find in other catacombs. And if these share the same architecture as the catacombs, it means it must have been around from at least the Erdtree era, because these catacombs designs are meant to facilitate Erdtree burial, something we learn about via the root resin item description, which reads, "The roots of the Great Tree were once linked to those of the Erdtree, or so they say, and it is for that reason catacombs are built around Great Tree roots. So it therefore tracks that these catacombs are an Erdtree era construction, meaning that this underground church must also be. This does make sense, as it is directly connected and built into the wall of the giant cistern which makes up the central hub of the sewer network. However, behind the movable altar lies the frenzied flame prescription, the Tomb of the Three Fingers, and this could be older than Leyndell and the church in front of it.
King, queen, rook pawn.
Firstly, the
Yes, I
architecture
can
is
grab
different from
them
that
all.
of regular catacombs, or at least it doesn't have the same furnishings that would concretely align it with them,
Actually, I do
such as the
have to grab
skeleton statues. And given this church in front of it seems to have been built with the express purpose of sealing and hiding the frenzied flame prescription, it surely must have come after the original tomb was built. The timeline in Elden Ring isn't clear, and so while this is an ancient god, the founding of Leyndell itself could also be considered an ancient event, and so we can't really use that terminology to determine if this tomb was built before Leyndell. However, what I would like to say is that I would guess that this tomb was built independently of Leyndell, but was later sealed by those of the Erd Tree behind the false altar we find in the Shunning Grounds. We of course know that the royal family must have been responsible for its sealing, because of A. Morgoth's seal, knowing that at least he was familiar with what lay in this tomb, and B. we learn that the great caravan of the nomadic merchants was sealed within the tomb via items like the nomadic merchant chapeau,
different
which reads
style
as follows.
than yours.
These merchants once thrived as the great
I
caravan.
honestly,
but
I
after
like
being
that
accused
mine
of
look.
heretical beliefs.
I look like that. There's. I think it's in the Internet Archive. These are all the bosses. Here, I'll hold the tree sentinel concert here. I believe it was Creative Uncut. Yes. I like that mine looks a little, or like, well, I would say my painting style looks a little closer to the concept art. It's a little more, I would say, raw-ish than any other style, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just differentiating styles. You're not. I'm just gonna move this real quick. If it'll focus. Does anyone actually crack the middle? I don't believe so. I mean, there's the entire concept art book. But I don't think anyone's actually done that, like, gotten the files for them. But you have the pawn, then the rook, which is the wandering mausoleum, and then and then you saw the knight. And the bishop. This one I actually have to bring somewhat close. It'll focus. Anyways, you can somewhat see it better from here. I don't like autofocus at all. And then King is Godfrey, first Elden Lord, with Sephiroth on his back. I'm about to paint this one, or I can start. You know what? I'm gonna play Ultra Kill. Either I'm gonna paint the king or I'm playing Ultra Kill. Then this is the queen. I cannot wait to paint this one. It's gonna be most expensive of them all, and the most detailed. Do you prime your? Oh yeah, these are already primed with gray, not matte. I don't think it's matte or satin. Yeah, I don't believe it's neither. But I prime all mine with gray. Here, I am going to check on dinner because I do believe it's done. I'll be right back. I'm back. Okay. I'm gonna play Ultra Kill. But okay, here. I gotta set up my door. I guess gotta move all these paints away. Okay. I could give you some pizza. Oh no, you're fine. You don't have to give me some. I can get it myself. I place them for cheap. Hi. Here, hold on. Might be a little loud. Because I gotta move my microphone closer. Sorry, it makes noise. Camera. There we go. He's real. Yep. Camera. There we go. Okay, there. Oh my god. Love Key and Peele. Wait, sorry, I forgot. Wait. Alright, I haven't seen anything of Layer Rod, so it started. One second. I would say I'm really good at Ultra Killing. I can hear my phone being done. Full screen. Please, now please tell me it's out, please. If I scroll up, oh, yay! It's here. Oh, it's here. Okay, alright. I'll be right back. I'm gonna get my food. Let's. I can get that. Oh well. Alright. Doggos him. Oh my god. Lame. Alright. I haven't had any